Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on royal weddings, then and now. My name is Sarah Speltz, and I'm Associate Director in the BU Alumni Relations Office. Today's webinar is sponsored by the Boston University Alumni Association and is offered as part of our alumni educational programs. Many of our programs are held on campus, but we offer educational webinars because we want to connect with our alumni around the globe. And we do have alumni joining us today from China, France, and Great Britain, as well as many places around the US, including Arizona, California, Colorado, Florida, Georgia, New Jersey and New York, North and South Carolina, North Dakota, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Utah, Tennessee, Texas, Virginia, Washington, Wyoming, and of course, all over New England and on campus. Before I introduce today's speaker, just a few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being hosted on our Zoom online meeting platform. If you experience any trouble with the audio or visual portions of this presentation, please contact Zoom support at 1-888-799-9666. And that number does appear on the screen at the moment. Today's presentation is being recorded and will soon be available for on-demand viewing on the Alumni Association website, which is www.bu.edu/alumni. Our speaker today is very eager to answer any questions you have, and you are welcome to submit them throughout the presentation using the Q&A box by hovering either over the top or bottom of your screen and selecting Q&A. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for the day. Presenting from the campus here in Boston is Arianne Chernock, and I will tell you just a little bit about her. Arianne is Associate Professor of History in the College of Arts and Sciences. Her research focuses on modern British and European history with an emphasis on gender, culture, politics, and the monarchy. Her first book, Men and the Making of Modern British Feminism, called fresh attention to the forgotten but foundational contributions of men to the creation of rights of women in late 18th century Britain. She's currently working on a book exploring the politics of queenship over the long 19th century. In her capacity as a historian of monarchy, Charnock has published numerous opinion pieces and editorials and provides frequent commentary to a range of print, radio, and television outlets. She's been very busy this season because of the royal wedding, so we're very lucky to have her here. And we here in the office are enjoying some tea in celebration. So Arianne, I'm going to turn things over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks to all of you who are with me today to participate in this webinar, which I really hope will be a conversation. I want to answer your questions at the end, so please ask them. So when we think of iconic royal weddings, I suspect many of us turn to Charles and Diana's 1981 wedding first. You probably remember that billowing 25-foot-long train Diana wore, slowly unfurling behind her as she stepped out of her carriage in front of St. Paul's Cathedral. Or perhaps we turn to Kate and William's more recent wedding in 2011. Then 2.3 billion people tuned in to watch Kate say her vows in that Alexander McQueen gown as Sister Pippa and other royal well-wishers looked on. These weddings, like the wedding of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle that will take place this Saturday, were televised affairs. And the fact that they were televised no doubt contributed to the public interest in them. Even those spectators who could get nowhere near St. Paul's Cathedral or Westminster Abbey were able to feel intimately connected to the events that were taking place. Just as they've been able to feel intimately connected to Diana and Kate in the months and weeks leading up to the wedding through photographs, the tabloid press, and an increasingly rapid news cycle. The fact that Diana and Kate, like Meghan, were also young, beautiful, fashion-forward women didn't hurt either. All in different ways seemed to embody some version of a modern fairy tale, and the operative word there really is seemed. It was an illusion or appearance. In the next few minutes, however, I will be suggesting that our fascination with royal weddings is nothing new. While the advent of mass media has certainly amplified interest, it in and of itself did not create the phenomenon. At the same time, I will also be suggesting that what moves us to follow these royal events is not just the fairy tale aspects of the weddings. Royal weddings, like royal births, deaths, coronations, and jubilees, they also do real and substantive work in the world. And that's really the big point I'm going to be stressing during my talk this afternoon. So first, let's look at the long-standing tradition of royal wedding enthusiasm. Because long before the era of Twitter, YouTube, CNN, and Hello and People magazines, royal weddings were still a big deal. And this was the case not just for those getting married and their immediate families, but also for those following these events, both at home, in Britain, and overseas. When Queen Victoria married her cousin Albert in 1840, her subjects clamored for information about the wedding and followed every detail of the nuptials in the pages of the Times of London and other dailies and periodicals. These stories covered everything from the specifics of Victoria's then quite unusual white dress to the 300-pound wedding cake covered with sugar of the purest white. Never did St. James's Park present such an extraordinary display, reported one journalist in 1840. Never was such an immense multitude assembled there since the rejoicings at the visit of the Allied sovereigns in 1814. Nor was this enthusiasm confined to Britain alone. Americans, too, in 1840, wanted details about the dress, the lace, the white satin shoes, and the Chapel Royal at St. James's Palace, where the couple were married. And when Victoria's eldest son, Albert Edward, the Prince of Wales, married Princess Alexandra in 1863, all England was in an ecstasy of enthusiasm, according to the New York Times. The English journals, the newspaper reported, teem with accounts of the triumphal journey of the Prince of Wales and the Princess Alexandra through Gravesend, through London to Windsor, and of the royal wedding to the exclusion almost of all other topics. At points along the wedding route through London, streets became impassable. And again, this is in the 1860s. Indeed, so numerous were the crowds that fatalities ensued. Several royal well-wishers were trampled to death, victims, in the words of papers at the time, of the rush and crush in the streets in London on the day and evening of the wedding. Similar crowds were reported at the wedding of Prince Albert, the future George VI, and Lady Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon in the spring of 1923. Even though the prince was not then the heir apparent, Albert's older brother David, the future Edward VIII, was still next in line to the throne at that point. The public proved just as interested in the royal wedding. London drops all for royal wedding, reported one newspaper headline in 1923. And that public, again, included an impressive number of Americans. About 250,000 Americans descended on London that spring to take part in the festivities, visiting Westminster Abbey, purchasing commemorative postcards of the royal couple, and sneaking over to Bruton Street, home of Lady Elizabeth's parents, to try to catch a glimpse of the bride and groom. And when Princess Elizabeth, George and Elizabeth's eldest daughter, now of course Queen Elizabeth II, married Philip Mountbatten at Westminster Abbey in the fall of 1947, the greatest royal radio show in history ensued. That event was narrated in 7 different languages, with the US alone sending representatives from 3 major networks, anchored by Edward R. Murrow at CBS, who was returning to London after reporting from London during World War II. Much of the broadcasting turned on Elizabeth's gown, a symphony in ivory white, designed by Norman Hartnell. This long history of royal wedding watching then leads me to a question, and I'm sure it's a question many of you have asked as well. Why? What function do royal weddings serve, especially in the modern era, when the crown has lost most, though not all, of its political functions? What has sustained our interest over such a long period? It's so durable. So yes, escapism is certainly a part of the story. royal weddings do provide a nice release, as they have for centuries. They provided a release from the industrial woes of the 1840s. They provided a release from the US Civil War in the 1860s. And they provided a release from post-war austerity measures in the 1940s, and from mass unemployment in Thatcherite Britain in the 1980s. And we might well say the same for our present moment. Certainly, the romance of Meghan and Harry provides a break from our depressing and often volatile news cycle. As one spectator stationed outside of Buckingham Palace explained in 1947 on the day of Princess Elizabeth's wedding, God knows there isn't much that's steady these days. How refreshing then to follow a story that turns on love, royal palaces, and high fashion. Who wouldn't want that? But there's also a lot more going on here. Royal weddings are also fundamentally social and political affairs which accrue different meanings, often charged meanings, in different contexts. For centuries, of course, royal weddings would have been political because the alliances forged through marriages were of deep strategic import. Like their peers in other countries, British royals looked outward to royal families abroad for suitable matches for their children. They did this not just because they were concerned about preserving royal bloodlines, though that was crucially important, but also because marriages were opportunities to shore up or forge fresh national alliances. I should note here, though, that foreignness was not always an asset. The Catholic and foreign origins of some of the Stuart queens in the 17th century contributed to the eventual downfall of the Stuart line. And Queen Victoria's own husband, Prince Albert, was treated with considerable skepticism by the British public for his German roots. And the modern royal family would eventually come to disavow their German origins during World War I, when they changed their name from Saxe-Coburg-Gotha to the much more suitably English-sounding Windsor. But even as the monarchy has come to assume a largely ceremonial function in British politics, and even as the royal family itself has become much more flexible about what constitutes a suitable marriage, and we certainly see that on display this time around, royal weddings still have political and social import. This often has less to do with the members of the royal wedding party itself and what they do or say, and more to do with how the event is perceived by others and by how others engage with the wedding events. Its meanings are not self-evident, rather they are constructed. At Elizabeth and Philip's wedding in 1947, for instance, Cold War politics dominated the media commentary. Much discussed was the fact that the Soviet press and radio completely ignored the wedding festivities. The Irish government, incensed by the partition of their country in 1922, also proved aloof, refusing to send a gift to the royal couple. In this way, the wedding became a way of sizing up and taking stock of geopolitics. Conversely, those who did tune in 1947, those who did send gifts, were those committed to highlighting their ties to Britain. Not surprisingly, the most enthusiastic audiences were in the Commonwealth and former colonies, those who felt a tie to Britain. And I think we can see that as a source of American enthusiasm for these royal events as well. And in fact, the monarchy has a very long history of propping up these imperial and post-imperial relationships. In many cases, it is the cement. In a different, though no less intriguing vein, some of those who followed Elizabeth and Philip's wedding in 1947, especially American housewives, were particularly taken by the unusual gender dynamics on display in their marriage. Despite Elizabeth's vow to obey Philip, it was clear to many onlookers that the marriage would be atypical. Philip takes orders from Elizabeth, one American female analyst explained. What wife doesn't secretly wish she had the same authority? And again, this is in the late 1940s. Or in the blunter words of another commentator, this was the first time, quote, that the women of America have found a heroine who makes them feel superior to men. We see the same social and political work still continuing on today. For in the weeks leading up to Harry and Meghan's wedding on the 19th, The nuptials have come to serve as an index or gauge to pressing social problems, especially in regards to the thorny status of race in Britain. This was an issue that recently came to the fore with the controversy around the harsh treatment of the Windrush generation, or immigrants from the former Empire and Commonwealth, especially from the West Indies, who arrived in Britain in the post-World War II period. So in these trying post-Brexit times, the wedding has thus become a focal point for those trying to articulate their national visions and values. Is theirs a post-racial and inclusive society, one which welcomes immigrants, or is theirs one in which race continues to structure and limit people's experiences of being British, to inform and determine who gets included and who gets excluded? What does it mean for Britons to have a biracial American divorcee educated in the Catholic tradition, no less, as a member of the royal family, and a prominent one at that? I don't think Britons have yet reached a consensus on this, and I don't want to see Britons becoming too self-congratulatory. Incidentally, the debates about race filtered through discussions of Meghan Markle remind me of the similar debates about class that took place when Kate Middleton joined the royal family. Is Britain a post-class society or not? The fact that so many of William's friends ridiculed Kate's mother for her lower or middle class background and her work as a stewardess suggests otherwise. You may remember the Toilet Gate episode where Carol Middleton called the bathroom the toilet rather than the loo being the preferred upper class term for the bathroom. So to return to my earlier point, royal weddings accrue all sorts of meanings. They do real work in the world. Now this, however, is not to suggest that royal couples have no control over their own stories, over the meanings that their weddings assume. Consider Meghan and Harry. Not only have they decided not to include state leaders at the ceremony, which is in and of itself a pointed act, but they've also decided to channel much of the goodwill directed at them toward very progressive, controversial even causes. One organization, for example, that they are urging their followers to consider donating to is the Maina Mahila Foundation, which is working to end what is called period poverty in Mumbai, India. The organization employs women in the slums to make and distribute sanitary napkins to those who might not otherwise have access to them. In this way, Meghan and Harry are helping to shape the narrative around their wedding and the uses to which the royalty can be put. And the monarchy has a long history of using philanthropy to shine a light on certain key issues and to engage with the public. So Meghan and Harry are certainly working in that tradition. So bottom line, the meanings that royal weddings accrue can stem from the central participants or central players, as well as from onlookers and commentators. So I want you to bear all of these points in mind this weekend when you turn on your televisions to watch the media spectacle unfolding in Windsor, England. In fact, that's already unfolding in Windsor, England. I know they were doing rehearsals just this morning. For the event has meanings that extend far beyond what Meghan wears, who ends up walking her down the aisle, and which celebrities end up being in attendance. Thank you.
Ariane, thank you so much. So the Q&A box is available for you guys to ask questions, and as soon as you start typing them in, we will get going. So Ariane, when did you start sort of paying attention to the coverage of this particular wedding? It's been inundating us this week, but when did the frenzy start?
As soon as the engagement was announced, so it's been months.
Okay, so we have some questions here. Will Meghan need to become a British citizen before accepting any sort of title?
She isn't. I don't know if she actually has her British citizenship yet, but she's certainly in process for becoming a British citizen.
And who pays for the royal wedding?
Who pays for the royal wedding? That is an excellent question. So the monarchy, the family itself is contributing a lot of the funds through their lands, which they don't technically own. I guess some taxpayer money in Britain will be going to the wedding, but it's a pretty minimal amount.
So we have another question here. Can you talk about if Meghan will have to temper her political views, if at all, once she's married?
That is the most fascinating question. We shall see. She's an older woman. She's a savvy woman and seasoned. I don't think she would be taking on this position if she felt that she would really have to restrain herself. Let's put it that way.
Can you talk a little bit about the tradition in England of bridesmaids and page boys being younger children?
That is something I really know very little about, other than that is a tradition. That we've seen that for centuries. I don't know where it begins, to be honest.
Well, we have many more questions. So Barbara says, fascinating analysis. And she said, is it also our need to have archetypes, part of our collective unconscious? This tradition of the media frenzy, I think.
Yeah, no, I think there is that psychological element, which it sounds like you're referring to here. I think that is a strong impulse that probably draws us to these figures, and we have very few today. So the royal family fulfills that role in a way that many others can't.
William and Kate were married on a weekday. Why do you think Meghan and Harry chose a weekend?
Yes, I know a lot of my friends in Britain are a bit disappointed that they're not getting a holiday. And in fact, for Kate and William's wedding, so much of the enthusiasm, I think, stemmed from having that day off of work. You know, he's the second son. He's the spare, not the heir. They're choosing to have their wedding also not in central London, as has been tradition now for many of the more recent members of the royal family. By choosing Windsor, by choosing to do it on a weekend, they're trying to make this, I think, a more intimate, I should put that in quotes, intimate, low-key affair. But obviously the interest is probably going to be larger scale for this wedding than for any other.
So there's a lot of discussion, Samantha says, about who will walk Meghan down the aisle now that her father isn't attending. Mm-hmm. Do you think the royal family would allow Meghan's mother to walk her down the aisle, or is that something that would still be considered taboo?
I think that they would, and I think that probably they will, but obviously I'm not privy to insider information here. I think that would also be a wonderful symbol, because, you know, so many people have been talking about the significance of Meghan's biracial status, and Meghan herself has talked about that a lot. And I think by having her mother there with her, she, you know, Meghan is always so quick to say she's very proud of her heritage. I think that would be the ultimate act of kind of acknowledgement and inclusion.
Let's see. Friends in London, devotees of the monarchy, believe Miss Markle will be the next Fergie. Is that the prevailing view?
I wonder what the questioner means by Fergie. Is really, she was the foil, I would say, to Diana. And so there has been some speculation about the kind of relationship that's going to emerge between Kate and Meghan over the next few years. But I don't see them as parallel, really. I think Meghan is coming to this with a more kind of a maturity and a seriousness in her approach that was perhaps lacking with Fergie.
Rebecca says, she has two questions here. Will Meghan's royal status constrain her ability to be an actress? That's the first question.
Yes, well, she's basically said goodbye to her acting career. So I think she has made that choice to give it up, as she's closed her website, the TIG, right? I mean, she's already made these decisions. Yeah.
And additionally, is there a reproductive expectation as part of the royal family?
Yes, I mean, it's really hard to escape the strong biological impulse that is at the heart of a lot of these women's responsibilities. It's one of the most archaic, possibly disturbing aspects of their positions, but I think there would be a lot of disappointment if they chose not to reproduce. And they've already publicly talked about their desire to. So again, I think they're owning this.
Regarding the dresses, does the Queen have to, quote, approve?
Not to my knowledge. But
I'm surprised, actually.
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure they run it by her, but she has to approve of the marriage, but I don't think she has to approve of the dress. That might be a level of micromanagement that would be too much.
Do they have the tradition of something old, something new, something borrowed, and something blue?
That I also don't know. I don't know. I've heard a lot about different aspects of the, certainly they're recycling their significance in terms of which tiaras they wear, but I don't know if it's exactly that formulation.
Okay, let's see. We actually have a little bit of a follow-up to the question about her mom walking her down the aisle. Erin asks, why does it seem like a big deal if her mom walks her down the aisle?
Well, it's a big deal, I would say, on two levels. On one level, traditionally it's the father of the bride that would walk the bride down the aisle. So that's a kind of departing from the norm. But also the fact that, her mother is African American, I think puts front and center, as I said before, her biracial status and would kind of in a visual way, the optics of that would really call attention to it in a way that I think would be wonderful.
This seems like kind of a tricky question. The royals have had some blood type issues. Do you know Meghan's blood type and can she bear children? That's very specific.
I don't know her blood type. I haven't I haven't done research on that. I think she has to think at this point that she can bear children to take on this role because it would be a really punishing one if she already had that information.
Wow. Now let's see. We have a lot of questions coming in. This question actually also goes back to the bridesmaid and pageboy question, or perhaps offers an answer. Isn't the idea of having young children as bridesmaid and pageboy supposed to be symbolic of the children they will be inspired to have?
I mean, certainly I think, many weddings have children playing a central role in them, and it's a reminder of the multi-generational aspects. Perhaps there's some sort of a nod to fertility or future fertility in that tradition.
Yes. Is there something in particular that you are most curious to see on Saturday morning? Because you will be watching, right? Is there something that you're specifically watching for?
I would love to see with this couple what kind of a balance they strike between tradition and modernizing, because I think they're trying to hit that sweet spot in their relationship and the way that they engage the public. And a wedding is one of those most traditional moments, I think, in any relationship. So I'll be curious to see what new elements they introduce while still obviously deferring to custom.
This is an interesting one. Has there been any history of adoption in the royal family for any couples that cannot bear children themselves, or maybe at all? Have there been?
There certainly have been rumors about adoptions, but to my knowledge, no known adoptions. But don't trust me 100% on that, because I'm sure if I did some digging and I traced out the royal family far enough, I would find some instances. But it does get to this larger question about kind of what happens when a couple, especially one in the spotlight like Meghan and Harry will be, can't reproduce. We haven't in recent memory had to deal with that, and it would be, I think, that would spark an interesting set of conversations about options.
And now we have a question here. Can you elaborate on any of the rumors?
Which rumors?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Perhaps our questioner will explain. Let's see. Oh, the rumors about adoption. I didn't know there were rumors.
I didn't know that either.
We're starting one.
There's so much material out there. I mean, it's really hard to keep up, and different sources claim to be authorities. It's really hard to separate out what's true from what's kind of hearsay or speculation at this point.
So Tracy asks, where are they going to be living after the wedding? And I would add my own question to that. How is that decided? Who decides where they live? Is it up to them? Is it up to the Queen?
I think it's a conversation that they have. So they might choose Kensington Palace, which is certainly where their brother and sister-in-law live. I don't know if they've actually made public their plans. Kensington Palace seems like a likely option.
And do you have a guess as to the tiara she will wear?
I don't know which tiara she will wear, but I'm sure it will be one that has significance. And again, that is a nod to tradition. And I'm sure they'll think carefully about whose it was. Perhaps the Queen, one of the queens. Perhaps it will be something from Diana. I think those would both be nice touches.
Do you have any sense of how many there are to choose from? I mean, how many options does she have?
There are quite a few. Quite a few.
So I'm curious where you are looking for your sources of information about this. Is there a specific news source that you see as having really good coverage that people can look to, or a place where people can go if they are curious to see official photos and that kind of thing? What's the best way to go about that?
Well, there are a number of sources I would go to for information. I think the New York Times has provided very good, very kind of reasonable coverage. I always look to the BBC as well. You know, when you're looking at the British papers, you have to kind of bear in mind the royalist or anti-royalist leanings of the newspapers. So the Times of London tends to be much more kind of royalist in their coverage, whereas the Guardian would be more skeptical. So I kind of like to look at a range of newspapers to get a sense of the spectrum of opinions that are out there, and then I can formulate my own.
And we can actually mention really quickly that if you happen to watch CNN this weekend, you'll see one of our BU deans. He'll be offering some commentary on there. So if you guys are interested, you can check that out. So we have a question about flowers. Can you talk about the history of the flowers that have been chosen for British royal families then and now?
I wish I could. That's really beyond, outside of my bailiwick. I'm sure they're significant, and I know they're carefully chosen. I just know very little about that aspect of the ceremony.
This question might be in a similar vein, and then we have one that is a little more about politics. So can you talk a little bit about the Fascinator Trend?
Why that's just, again, that's kind of a nod to tradition. The British love their hats, especially for these kinds of occasions, and the fascinators. And so you really see them coming out in full force in these moments.
All right, here's the serious question. Is this current wedding symbolic of a neo-geopolitical US-UK relationship? Are only Americans in the North so crazy about this event? What about Canadians or Latin Americans?
That's a great question. I've certainly fielded questions from members of the media in various Latin American countries as well as Canadian countries. So I think there's an American interest, but there's also a global phenomenon. I think it's kind of Britain first, and then those countries that have some sort of a formal or informal tie to Britain, whether it's past or present, where you see the most enthusiasm. So Canada would fall into that category. And then it, of course, just transcends those ties and becomes also just a global experience that people want to participate in and follow, even if just through newspaper accounts.
Yeah, it's, similarly, are there other parts of the world that are really in a frenzy about this too? Do you have a sense? Are people watching in Australia? Are they going to be watching in parts of Asia? Is there any interest there?
Yeah, I think the royal family status in some of these Commonwealth nations is a little bit more complicated than in the U.S. maybe, or in Latin American countries. This is not our government, so we are allowed to kind of view the events with a more romantic lens. I think in Canada and Australia and other places, it's a little bit more mediated through different understandings of what the role of the monarch should or shouldn't be, and there are debates around that. But there is still tremendous enthusiasm. In fact, I was listening to the BBC this morning, and even in Ireland, while some are incensed that there's going to be live coverage of the wedding, because Ireland has a really complicated relationship with Great Britain, there's so many people there who are still so enthusiastic about this wedding. So that's the ultimate litmus test, I would say.
Will the U.S. have a formal presence at the wedding?
Well, as I mentioned before in my comments, Harry and Meghan have decided not to invite state leaders. That being said, Meghan's American, and many of her friends are American and will be at the wedding. So yes, there will be Americans.
Aaron is asking, why don't the men usually wear wedding rings?
Great question. Let me know. I don't know. I don't know. I want to know though. So find out and then send me an email.
Perhaps someone will. Yes, perhaps someone will send us the answer in the Q&A box here, because that would be great. So what is the official time? It starts at 7 a.m. on Saturday. If people
Correct.
are planning to watch, everyone who's on here probably already knows that because they're they're watching because they're interested in the wedding.
I think some networks are starting their coverage even earlier.
Oh, really? Like the
Yeah,
red carpet sort of thing.
exactly.
Okay. That's
And
great.
there are a lot of different options for how to watch. In fact, in the New York Times today, they give you they map out all the different ways that you can go. I guess a number of movie theaters are also opening up to broadcast the wedding in America if you feel like making it more of a neighborhood event.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah,
Okay, so you can watch it on the big screen.
exactly.
That's great.
I'm debating. I still don't know which channel I'm ultimately going to tune to. Maybe or CBS. I'm leaning towards.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if folks who are listening are interested in reading more of your thoughts on this, where can they look? Where can they find you?
That is a great question. So I just wrote a piece that's on the WBUR site, that's the local NPR affiliate, about the role of women in the royal family and political power. So that's on the Cognoscenti site. I've also, I wrote a piece a few years ago on the CNN site about our fascination, American fascination with the royal family. And you could always go to the BU History Department website and click on my link, and my CV is there with a range of pieces I've written.
Thank you. Oh, and we actually got one answer, not specifically to the ring question or a couple of the other questions, but Sarah has added a note here. She said, the Reverend Michael Curry, presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church USA, will be preaching. And she says, that's a pretty significant American presence.
That is.
That's great. This great information coming in. All right, we have time for one or two more questions if anyone has one. Otherwise, we will let people get to planning their parties and finding their fascinators and drinking their tea.
And I guess our elderflower cocktails, right?
Oh, is that the official cocktail?
I think that's one of the I think that maybe their wedding cake is, I don't know, it's amazing what you can find once you kind of go down the rabbit holes online right now.
Yes, I've seen multiple posts, pictures on all of the social media channels. Well, I think we actually got to all of the questions. Arianne, I appreciate you so much taking the time today. And I want to remind all of the BU alumni who are online with us that we have a whole library of webinars on our website at bu.edu/alumni. And we also, of course, have our biggest event of the year every September, Alumni Weekend, when you're all invited to come back to campus, and we hope to see you there. So thank you all so much for logging on and spending your lunch hour or whatever time it is where you are, spending some time with us, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you so much.